Welcome back, everyone, to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan, along with my co-host, Kathryn Peterson. And today we're going to unpack a topic that at first glance is going to sound way too easy. And my hope is by the time that you've finished listening, you're going to realize the superpower of saying no. And so the power of saying no is our topic. And no is a very short word that everyone understands. I mean, I don't even think you need to speak the English language to understand the word no. I think it's a universal word that just about every culture can understand at its face value. So I won't waste your time with simple definitions like the difference between yes and no. But I'd sure love to dig into some of the nuances of where this can become a superpower for you and your team. But before I dive into the details, as always, let me welcome in Kathryn. Good to see you today as well.
Yeah, good to see you. And it's always great to record these. And this will be a great topic because I think that this is a muscle we all need to practice. So I'm excited to dig in a little bit.
Yeah, so let's just start there with a question that you probably wouldn't have expected. Why does this feel like a topic that we all need to spend some time on? I don't disagree with you at all, but what made you respond that way? Why is this such an important topic?
I think that it depends a little bit on the person, but we all want to please others in some form. We want to say yes, and we want to contribute, and we want to help. But there's a danger in that if you say yes to too much, then you can't do anything, or you can't do what you really set out to do and what you're committed to. So I think that this is a very good topic that doesn't get talked about enough. And I think it's been very, very important in my life. I've learned different tips and tricks on this over the years that I'm excited about sharing because they've helped me tremendously keep my life under control and in a way that I'm focusing on the goals that are important to me.
So you're right on track with my thinking, and I want to expand that a little bit with if we look at things through the lens of behavioral style, and we recognize that sometimes our behavioral styles can appear to be polar opposites. So let's say someone is a highly driven person, and let's say someone else is a highly sensitive person. They can often be at tension with each other because the driven person is really focused more on pace and tasks, where the highly sensitive person is more focused on feelings and people. And
Yeah.
they really have a different approach, not good or bad, just different. This happens to be one of those topics that both of them can experience for different reasons. You mentioned the people pleasing side. So let's imagine if you are more people oriented than task oriented by nature, you're probably going to struggle with saying no because you don't want to disappoint someone. You don't want to make them feel bad.
Yeah.
You don't want to feel bad.
Yeah.
Those are very normal feelings. But the same can happen on the task side with the person who's kind of an overachiever and they want to say yes to everything because they want to accomplish everything. And that makes it hard for them to say no as well. So this turns into one of those topics when I'm working with a team and they're struggling with how do I even relate to this person who's so opposite of me? This is sometimes a topic where we can
Mm.
really build a bridge.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the more you're comfortable saying no, I feel like that can excel your career, which seems very opposite. Obviously, saying yes to things as well is important, but I think that as you start to excel and as you start to become good at what you're doing, you get asked more and more. And so it becomes a more vital topic the further you are, I think, along in your career too.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Because typically, if you're advancing in your career, people are recognizing, oh, she handled that really well. Well, let me give her this, and she
Mm-hmm.
handled that really well, and I'll add that.
Mm-hmm.
And before you know it, you've said yes to so many things that it's stunting your ability
Yeah.
to do more in a execution sense, and maybe even diluting the effectiveness of what you are doing, even in the
Mm-hmm.
current sense, because it's a very difficult thing to multitask. That's one of the myths that I think exists in our modern culture. Most of us that were raised in some version of Gen X plus or minus that era, were taught multitasking as a real asset. We were taught that this was a thing to develop, a thing to really develop expertise in. Like the better you can become at multitasking, the better you will perform. And modern brain science allows us to break that down in a way that says, wait a minute, that's not exactly what your brain is doing. That's not exactly an effective characteristic at all. And we've learned the hard way that multitasking actually is your ability to do, twice as much as you should, about half as well as you could. So, this idea of saying no becomes really important in this modern era where things are moving faster than they've ever moved, and we've got more access to more technology than we've ever had that might allow us to, at the surface, say yes to more things. But what it really does is it contributes to that multitasking dilemma where our brain is being over extended and at some point exhausted. So let's dig into maybe one of these topics more specifically. So where do you think that we can best develop the filters around what to say no to? If I were to ask you to start, learning how to say no in an area of your practice, what filters would you access to start that process?
For me, who is asking? So obviously, if it's my husband, I'm probably going to say yes. Right? Like, hey, can you help out with this? And not always, but you know what I mean. Who is asking? And does it align with my goals? What's the time commitment? Do I feel passionate about this potential project? Is it a short term? Like, is it a great, I'm going to spend a month on it and then it's going to be done? Or is it an ongoing commitment? So, what does that commitment look like? Not only just in the time per week, but what's the time span of that commitment? So those are kind of my quick ones, just off the cuff, that I kind of think through a little bit as I get asked to do something.
Yeah, great place to start, because you hinted at a couple of things that our audience might recognize from another episode where we talk about vision, and we look at vision as being made up of several components. So when you talk about your goals, that's a component of your vision, whether personally or professionally. Things you're aiming toward, things you're trying to achieve. Well, if you're really clear on where you're going, it becomes a lot easier to say no to things that are going to take you away from where you're going. So it's really important to spend the time to develop those. I heard someone say not too long ago, if you don't have a vision for your own future, you'll spend most of your life working for someone else who has a vision for theirs. And that's a powerful thought, and worth thinking about, because if we're developing this no filter, it's really difficult to do that if you haven't spent some time really reflecting on what are those values that I hold so dearly, the convictions in my heart that would allow me to say yes or no, because I'm super clear on who I am and what I want and why I want it. So I love that your filter started with some examples like that. And I think if we play that out a little bit further, our teammates then can experience the same thing, because in our team culture, once as a leader, I've developed some clarity around those filters. I can share them with my team and they can embrace them as well. And now all of a sudden, as a team, we understand what to say yes and what we say no to, simply because we know how to filter out the things that don't fit those values.
Absolutely. One other filter I just thought of that doesn't come up a lot is I recently got asked to be on this advisory committee, and it sounded really interesting. It aligned with some of my vision and goals, but I realized I was about to say yes purely because of ego. And I think that that's another good filter is, am I saying yes because this really fits in, or am I saying yes because it'll make me look good, or my ego wants to do it because it kind of seems like a resume builder, even though that's not the stage of my life I'm in. So that was a filter that once I realized that, I thought, "Oh, you know what, this doesn't really fit in and I don't have the time to take this project on." And I said no. And that was one that I really had to think through and realize where that motivation was coming from.
Love that example. And it's really taking what I said and you put a very practical uh, version of that out for us to process. And that is when I say the who you are, the what you want, and the why you want it, you basically, with your ego, have to check the who am I? Is this in
Mhm.
alignment with who I am? It might be in alignment with where I'm trying to go. This might directionally be in
Mhm.
alignment, but it doesn't match up with who I am. And I think some of us feel that way about things like social media. They feel that, oh,
Mhm.
everyone is telling me I've got to develop my social media game. I've got to record video. And look, I'm not here to knock those things. My point is
Mhm.
run them through a filter, because the fact that social media exists as an outlet for advertising your brand and being
Mhm.
really clear on how to engage with other people, I understand the benefits of it, but doing it in a way that stays authentic to who you are really does matter, because people will see that quickly.
Mhm.
If you're just acting and pretending or
Mhm.
posing, it can damage your brand. So it really has to be done in an authentic way. And I think some people do this amazingly well. And because they do, we tend to, back to the people pleaser comment, and we think, well, gosh, if that's the way she's doing it, I should do it too. Um, and look, there's pros and cons to that. You have to know who you are before you say yes to that idea. Now, that doesn't mean don't try things. That doesn't mean don't
Right.
play around to figure out where are those boundaries. But once you've run into the boundary or you've hit the filter, stay true to yourself. And so let me ask you a different question. Is saying yes then a bad thing? Is there, let's flip the filter around. Like, if we're saying no to certain things, is saying yes ever a bad thing?
Not necessarily. I think that saying yes to either a too many things that you lose focus or you start veering to the off the road like you were talking about before, that can be. And then you sometimes have to back out of your yes, which is worse. But I think in general, there are things that are great to say yes to. And I think that it's using that filter. And then you feel really good about your yeses when you've really thought through your no's.
Yeah, I thought of a visual for this, and you may remember this. We may have been sitting in a room at Sales Mastery 10 years ago, and saw this same example. I remember Todd Duncan sitting on the stage, and he was trying to demonstrate this concept of different levels of priority and how we can fit them all into a day. And so he had on the table, a pitcher of water and some rocks and some sand, and he started, illustrating this. And the idea was that if we fill our jar, that was the vessel he was filling, if we fill it with the big rocks first, the most important things. So if we say yes to the most important things first, what are those things? Well, they're probably going to be things like, you mentioned Todd. So, your family is probably going to be a big rock, your health, because without it, you're not going to execute really well. Certainly in your career, there are going to be some big rocks, things that if you've signed up for this job, they go with
Mhm.
the role.
Mhm.
If you get the big rocks in first, it's amazing how you can add some smaller rocks as time goes. Like, okay, I can handle some things that aren't quite big rock category, but I want to try them. They're worth doing. Then when those are in the jar, there's still some room for some sand. Sand is more of the trivial tasks. You and I would say, at home it's taking out the trash. At work it's cleaning the inbox out. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of sand. And then the last vessel he had to pour in was water, and water is like the filler. And if you think about it, all of those things can fit if you put them in the right order. It's when you put them in the wrong order, so you fill up your
Mhm.
days with water and sand, and now you try to put some rocks in there, it starts splashing out and making a big mess all over everything. So that was such a great visual for
Mhm.
how to say yes to the right things first, and let that order determine the things that
Mhm.
you'll ultimately say yes
Mhm.
and no to. I love that visual.
Yeah. Yep.
Here's the other side. I want to flip that around. We're saying yes and no very vaguely, but sometimes we're saying yes and no to tasks, and sometimes we're saying yes and no to people. Are those the same thing? And in your world, how do you distinguish between saying no to a task or to a person?
Yeah, that's a great question that I haven't thought much about actually. So I think that how I would see that is, are there people in my life who most of the things they ask are going to be a yes versus a no? And also in a very basic format, that's hiring, right? You're saying yes to one person and no to another. So I think there's a combination of both. We all know those people who have very dynamic, awesome projects, or it might be a group or a company. Like there's a nonprofit here that being on that board is great because it's an advisory board. It's great people. It's well run. That's going to be a very different thing than a board of directors that has some dysfunction. So I think sometimes it's digging into not just the people or the person, but the organization and in addition to that, the tasks that are involved with that person or with that group. So I think that's how I would see it. But I also think that the more tasks we can get off of our list. So right now we're actually doing that awful time tracking tool that's so beneficial but so painful. And it is so good. That's how I hired my first person, is what tasks can I say no to figure out how to delegate to somebody that I can then hire and say yes to. So it's it's good to separate the two, and I think that's an important topic I want to think more on.
Yeah, you know who I think of when I think of this topic is our friend Todd Bookspan. When I think
Mhm.
about how he designed the win by noon system that he now trains on and coaches on, it it's an interesting approach. What he's really doing, if we boil it down to its simplest form, is he's time blocking the morning task activities as a priority to free up the afternoon
Mhm.
for the things that people might bring to him. So, in order to be highly available to people in the afternoon, it's a relentless focus on the tasks of the morning. Now, I don't mean to imply that some of those morning tasks don't involve people or some of those
Mhm.
afternoon people scenarios don't involve a task.
Yeah.
It's more around the idea of the way that he's chosen to prioritize it
Mhm.
and design with intentionality how to get things done before noon so that you've really freed up your afternoon to be highly available. And so when I think about the difference between people saying no to people and saying no to tasks, Todd's really come up with a way in which he can say yes to all those big rock tasks in the morning, feel really great by midday, and now feel really great if
Mhm.
he needs to say yes to people that have,
Mhm.
come along as the day progresses. That's a very practical example of it, maybe not the only one. One of the things Todd taught me, and I'd love to hear your take on this, is he and I both embraced this idea from, I think, a book Essentialism that we read about 10 years
Mhm.
ago. And the phrase was, if it's not a clear yes, then it's a no. Can you think of any examples either with your team or just in life in general where it doesn't matter if the request involved people or task, it just wasn't a clear yes? And were you able to flip it into a clear no?
I think that an example of this, it wasn't my decision, but someone else's, is when you pick a college. You
Mm.
kind of have um, this feeling of, oh, that one would be fun. Look at their library, or oh, they have this great food thing. And you go through all these different choices, and some are like, I could see myself there, but maybe I don't, and so eventually you get to the point where you're like, this feels right. And that's that kind of just all the pieces fit. Well, that makes everything else a no. And I think that a lot of times with that waffling, you can feel that in yourself of like, maybe this isn't quite right. Therefore, it just has to be a no. And I think that there's certain things that you do waffle probably forever on, but I think the other key with saying no is you have to make that decision and just move on, because I think we can beat ourselves up for like, what if I would have said yes and then maybe, well, great. And we can talk through some ways to say no in a way that keeps the door open if it's one of those kind of things that you're like, maybe just not now. So let's we can dig into that here more.
I love your college example because it opens up a lot of thinking around decisions in our lives that are like that. And we go through life making a lot of big decisions about the company we're going to join, the spouse we're going to
Mhm.
marry, the school we're going to go to, even things that are just more light and fun, like the team I'm going to join or the vacation I'm going to
Yeah.
commit to. All of these things are relatable to people, and when you look at it through that lens of, if it's not a clear yes, it's a no, one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is, don't forget that one of your options with no is what I would call not now. And
Mhm.
this is a tough one for people because if they tend toward more black and white thinking in their nature, no means no. And I
Mhm.
have to remind some of those folks, especially while I'm coaching, is okay, well, let's be clear. We're not taking that out back and shooting it dead. Like, we're just saying not now. It's not, this isn't your time to take action on that idea. This isn't your time to hire that person. This isn't your time to spend that marketing money, but it doesn't mean you'll never do it. It just
Right.
means not now. So how have you developed some skill around the no versus not now when you've looked at answers that have been, hey, it's not a clear yes, so it's a no. Do you ever come back and revisit your no's and think, oh, well, it's a different season, it's a different time? What would that look like in your practice?
So for me, the person asking, I put it back on them a little bit of, hey, I cannot say yes now. I need to honor the commitments I currently have in place, which is how I've learned to say no, which I think is a powerful way to do so. And, but please ask me again, and maybe the timing will be better for me. And then they can circle back if they feel like, oh, she's a good fit again, or oh, I'd like to ask her again about this. And it also gives me a chance to look at where's my life now and is this a better fit based on the revision to my goals, etc. So obviously you want to be careful about using that because if you say that to some people, they will be back in a month asking you the same thing. But I think, and it could be, hey, I'm a no right now, but once you get this, and I'm keep bringing up the board example, but once you get the board more solidified, let's chat again, reach out to me in a year or 2 years or whatever that looks like, so that you're kind of setting some boundaries on that timeline a little bit, because it could be that it's a great opportunity later. And therefore that door is still open a crack if they want to pursue it.
So I hope our audience is taking notes on what Kathryn just did, because it's so effortless for her that she probably doesn't think it's profound. But it's the effectiveness of your communication that really matters
Mm.
when you're saying no. It's being clear on what that not now means. And so being clear could mean several things, like, I really like this idea. It just doesn't fit
Mhm.
in my current time frame. Hey, I'm not sure about that idea, but I'd like to come back and explore it at a later date. And then maybe even being clear about, what do I mean by a later date? Do I mean next week, next month, or next year? All those things are very, again, you're effortless when you do this because it's your natural style. But I hope some of us have picked up on that, is that's your responsibility. If it's really easy for you to clarify those things, then obviously execute in your natural strength. But if that's not your nature, you don't tend to tie those things down. You're so glad to get them off the
Mhm.
phone by saying no that you didn't really think, oh, well, I didn't mean call me back next week. Well, then
Mhm.
let them know that. Give them a clue. It's most people. I mean, yeah, we all have met an annoying person who doesn't catch the clue, but most people just want to know, what do you mean? So give some definition to what
Mhm.
not now might mean, and it'll allow you to come back to it. So great job on that. All right, one more that I want to explore just because I think it's also part of the topic. So now let's go back to task mode. Most folks end up with some sort of task management system. For some folks, they've got Monday.com. For some folks, they've got a good old-fashioned to-do list. When you're managing that, have you learned the difference between how to have a to-do list and maybe a not to-do list?
Mm.
How does that play out in your task management?
There is a whole exercise around this that I've done a few times, which is basically looking at your day, figuring out what parts of your life or what parts of your workflow you should not be doing. For example, scanning documents or making, scheduling something or making a call or doing this or doing that. So some things have to go on the I'm not taking that on. It is a no on my day and it's a no on my task list. It's a not to do list for sure. So I have done that multiple times. And sometimes I think it's because we need a mental break that we're like, I'm just going to do that. And you just have to tell yourself that's a no for me right now. So absolutely that not to do list is a great exercise.
Yeah, when I meet someone who's telling me, so go back to your time tracker. And again, for those of you that haven't experienced a time tracker, it is a painful tool designed to bring total clarity to the excuses we make for why we don't get things done. And there's a lot of other things we learn from it. So it can also, help someone like your new employee. You can learn what can they handle, what's their pace, things like that. But ultimately, when we do that, we're looking at this through a lens of someone who's maybe confused reasons with excuses, and they've started telling you, well,
Mhm.
I just couldn't do it. I can't get it all in. I've too much on my plate. This kind of a language that you hear. And one of the things that I've noticed with someone who keeps a big to-do list is they're often in that mode of confusing their reasons with excuses. So I'll ask them to create a not to-do list. And some folks really struggle with this
Mm.
because in their mind, they think, well, I should be able to do that. Reality doesn't prove that out, but they think they can. And so one of the things I might encourage them to try is, well, let's sit down with your team and ask them to contribute to your not to-do list.
That's a great idea.
Suddenly they have a great camera angle on, yeah, I wish Kathryn would stop doing this and that and let me handle it. Don't overmanage me or don't take it off my plate. Stay focused on those things. And sometimes that clarity really helps. Well, one, it can help bring back to one of our previous episodes around the 5 levels of delegation. Maybe the handoffs aren't as clearly defined as they could be. But also it helps empower your teammates to participate in saying, hey, I want you to focus on your to-do list because those are great things to do. So your not to-do list is a really healthy boundary tool for how to know when to say no. And when
Mhm.
an opportunity comes up and you look down at your not to-do list and you realize, oh yeah, that's one of those things I said I wouldn't do. It's
Mhm.
helpful because we all need boundaries. Do you have any other exercises for creating boundaries, whether at home or at work, so that you're really clear on how to say no to the wrong things so you can stay focused on the right things?
I think that something I've brought up with a few people lately is if you have space in your life to say yes when the opportunities arise and you're prepared for those opportunities, that's pretty amazing. And sometimes you just need the space to be made. So you need to take some things off your plate. You have to say no so that when the right opportunity comes up, you can say yes. And I think people forget about that saying yes to one thing is saying no to something they don't even know is out there yet. So I think that that's a good extra filter to say, hey, what if instead of this being just a yes or no to this one thing, what if I had two things to pick from? What would that look like and how would that change my mind? And I think that's just a good view to say, do I need space for a future awesome opportunity?
Okay, again, audience, we're gold mining here. Like, pay attention to that. Again, that sounds so simple that it's very easy to think, well, did she really say something there that was profound? The answer is yes. Margin or white space, whatever you want to call that definition, built into your schedule is one of those multiplier ROIs. What do I mean by that? I mean this. If you have that white space in your day, in your week, designed on purpose to not be filled with tasks, A, it allows your brain some space to reset. B, it allows you some margin for things that, guess what, don't always go as scheduled, don't always fit exactly like you planned. But maybe C, this is really where the multiplier fits, is now when a new opportunity comes along, you have some space in which to evaluate it, maybe even try it, and ultimately to decide if it's an upgrade to something that you might want to say yes to. And so you can't do that if you don't have space. If you don't create that space intentionally, none of those things happen naturally. You're like a vehicle always running at, 6,000, 7,000 RPMs, you're hitting the red line, and your engine never really gets a break. It never gets to cool and calm down. And so try building some white space into your day and into your week in order to experience some of what Kathryn just talked about. I love that one as a boundary, just white space. It's a great place to start.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, I'm going to do one little teaser of an episode I thought of that we need to do. Another filter for yes or no is if you're really stuck on this, because some decisions are really difficult to make. And one suggestion I've given people is have a personal board of directors, which is that group that you can run as a filter to say, hey, here's this big decision in my life I'm about to make. What do you think from your perspective? And just to get opinions. So I think we'll do an episode on just creating your personal board of directors.
I love that episode. I've done that exercise. It's very powerful. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Let's definitely put a pin in that one and move it up on the list for sure. And maybe let's even invite in some guests for that episode, because I think some of us have experienced what some of those people that are on our personal board of directors have been able to do to impact our lives. And I'll again mention a guy like Bookspan. He has been one of those guys that at a season of my life played a role on that personal board and was super helpful in helping me redirect and reorient toward full-time coaching. And without him, I'm not sure I would have taken the chance. He was a huge part of that decision-making process. And you're right, that was a very big life decision. And I was very thankful to have him in my corner. So deal.
Absolutely.
Let's make that an episode.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, with that, we'll get this one closed out. Michael, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would simply ask our audience to look for some practical and simple ways to start practicing this. So maybe somewhere today you took thought on the white space comment, or maybe you took some thought on the, oh, no might just mean not now, or any of the other examples that we gave. I would ask you just pick one and practice it. Practice it for the next week or two and see if it helps. See if it helps create some of the mental margin you need and some of the confidence that you get from saying no. And look, whether you're like we said up front, a driven person or a sensitive person, everyone can benefit from this. So this is one of those beautiful topics that I think all of us can see some benefit from. And I'm excited to hear some feedback, especially when the comments show up on our YouTube channel. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I would say, practice this, like Michael said, and give yourself the grace to say no when it doesn't fit into what your vision is. And thanks so much for being here.